Right, so welcome to this special Rainbow Laces discussion with me, Danyal Khan, and I'm joined today by Sophie Griffiths. How are you, Sophie?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, just been really busy today filming stuff for Cheltenham Town for the Rainbow Laces. So yeah, it's been good to be kept occupied during this lockdown.
Yes, for sure.
Good to be busy, 100%. So we'll be talking about a few things in relation to Rainbow Laces and LGBTQ plus inclusion in sport and especially football. So let's get started. So let's think back to your debut for the first team before we get into this.
Yeah.
What have you learned since then?
Since then, we've been in lockdown, so it's been quite difficult. Obviously, that was like the last game that I played before we went into lockdown. But it was a really, really good game to go out on, 100%. Like, confidence was really good, and the way in which we played was so good, and I enjoyed it. So overall, it was a really good way to go as you can go into a lockdown with, and obviously that was really positive. So, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously playing for the development team as well, you have to find some sort of balance between both teams. How have you been finding that balance?
It's been a weird one at the moment because of the lockdown. Like, I've been doing a lot of lockdown stuff with the first, but I've still managed to do quite a lot of social stuff with the development. So it's just about finding that balance, and I think it will be hard to do to start off with, because obviously, like, development or like essentially my team that I've played with the most this year. And I'm vice captain in that as well. So it is going to be one of those things where I just balance it out and I get utilised as and when I'm needed. But overall, like, it's been really good. It's just been a weird time to make that transition effectively.
Yeah, and obviously we're nearly coming out of second lockdown now. So how's this lockdown been for yourself personally?
Lockdown has been okay for me. I've worked through it. So obviously I know a lot of people have been furloughed and it's been really tough. But overall, I've tried to stay active, tried to stay running, doing all those kind of things just to keep my mind busy. But no, it's been absolutely fine. I haven't had any major issues whatsoever.
That's great to hear. So we'll move on to a few LGBTQ plus questions.
Yeah, of course.
So how, obviously as an LGBTQ plus player, how accepted have you felt at Cheltenham Town Ladies as an LGBTQ plus player?
Oh, really accepted. Like, literally absolutely fine. Like, all the girls there are amazing. You find that a lot of the team have either are or they are friends with somebody that's LGBT, like Q, and like that's kind of just how it is, and it is kind of completely normal, and nobody ever really says anything. So I find it really easy. So yeah, overall, very, very accepting. Very accepting.
Yeah, and obviously it's Rainbow Laces month, and obviously that's where we share our stories with LGBTQ plus people. But like, for you, what does Rainbow Laces mean to yourself personally?
I think it's just about making sure that people are heard. Like, LGBTQ, the reason that like all of that is about is because people obviously 30 years ago, like even years and years and years ago before that, really struggled. And I think now it's just about making sure that they use the Rainbow Laces as this idea that everybody is heard and everybody is seen and everybody is equal and it's all inclusive. So it's one of those things that I think is really, really positive, and it can have a really good impact on especially loads of those people that maybe aren't out and aren't accepting of who they are. So I think it's a really, really good way of doing it.
And obviously the campaign consists of many sort of different strands, but what's your favorite aspect of Rainbow Laces campaign in terms of?
I think the idea that it's there for people to be heard is the main thing for me. I think when it comes to, I know a lot of people that are very, very scared to come out and stuff like that. And when you see somebody on the TV or somebody that you play with those laces, you don't need to speak out, you don't need to say anything, but it just shows that somebody's supporting you. So like, if somebody's wearing it in the team, they might not signify that they are LGBTQ in that community, but it shows that they're supporting it. So I think the fact that it's really like making sure that everybody feels heard and that football is inclusive and all sports are inclusive, no matter what your sexuality is. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, and obviously the campaign's been going now for a while. How do you think, if we look into the future, how do you think the campaign can evolve to make more impact?
It has an impact now already, like, and that it hasn't been that many years. Like, if you think about far in the future, I think it's going to help so many people come to terms with being in that community and being okay about it. The more people you see wearing those laces, the more everyone's going to be like, do you know what, it's actually fine, I don't need to worry about it. Like, lots of people are supportive and they're not going to discriminate, and that's just the way it is. And I think in years to come it will be a lot easier anyway, because obviously over time things change. So as much as it's changed from 30 years ago to now, like, it will just keep changing and it will keep getting better. And I think right now, especially being a footballer, I think it's a really easy time, more so now than ever, to come out and be who you want to be and not be judged for it.
Yeah, a lot of arguments put out there is that football mirrors society. Do you think that's the case in terms of why we see homophobia is because it's still prevalent in our society, or is it different?
I think maybe it's a really, really weird one, because I think it's way more accepted. Being in that community is way more accepted in female footballers in general. I think it's just completely normalized, which is brilliant. It's absolutely amazing. But I think if you look in other sports and you look at different genders, so you look at males, like, it's not so normalized, and I don't quite understand why. But I think that they have a harder time sometimes. I mean, you can't really compare the two, but I do think they do. And I think homophobia can, most of the time, is at matches, and that's where I think people find it really difficult. So it's just one of those things where it should never happen. Homophobia shouldn't exist, but it does, and it's about getting past that and making people see that everybody deserves to be treated exactly how they deserve to be treated. Like, there's no difference in who they are as a person just based on sexuality. But it's a really tricky one. But I think the idea of these things will help to, like, get rid of the majority of homophobia. But I think in the males game it's more difficult, definitely.
And why do you think the women's game is more LGBTQ inclusive compared to the men's? Is it to do, I've heard some arguments saying because the women's game's more new, so it's had to battle its own battles, and obviously it's
I mean, potentially. I think for as long as I can remember, it's always been quite accepted. Like, I think, like you said, maybe the fact that it's newer, but I think a lot of girls that grow up in teams, they are surrounded by that all the time. So it's like, I don't necessarily believe that essentially you're going to be in a team and you're going to be part of that LGBT community, and you're going to fall into that sexuality at all. But I think because you're surrounded by it as well, it's almost like that comfort of, okay, if I feel like maybe I'm in that LGBT community and I just can't accept it, I can see other people are doing that too. Like, they're coming out and they're happy, and I think that is really important.
Looking into women's football more specifically now, do you have any LGBTQ plus role models that you look up to, and if so, what impact do they have on your sporting life or just in general?
I think there's few, like, I'd say in general, every female footballer I look up to and I aspire to be like them. Like, at the end of the day, they are setting the bar really high. Megan Rapinoe, I think, is a really good role model. In terms of how she says it how it is. She does not care. Like, she's like very much to the point, and I think her morals and the way that she goes about things are really good, and she has the best interest of everybody at heart. And I think if you look at, like, the stats, I think it was like over 40 women that played in the World Cup were openly out. So I mean, it goes to show, like, that's televised, that was huge, and so many women are coming out now, and I think it is so good, and it is because of people that are playing in, like, team like USA, like American teams, and obviously in England and stuff like that. So it's all because of those people. I think that's why people are so understanding and so accepting. And the more people see that, the more people feel heard, and the more people feel like they can be who they want to be, which I think is the main thing.
Yeah, and obviously comparing the men's and women's game, just touching on that again, do you think the women's game is more inclusive because there's less stigma to being, like, lesbian compared to being a gay man?
I think it's a really tricky one, because I've got a lot of gay male friends who would probably say yes, and I do agree to an extent. I think they're just, girls are just more chilled out, and I think because it's always kind of been a thing there, like, people in your team, there are going to be people that fall into that, and to be honest, like, I think everybody's just so accepting and understanding, and everybody is women are generally very understanding anyway. So it's one of those things. Whereas I think in the male game, I think, especially if you look at the Premier League, it would be really hard. I think it would be really hard for them to, if they were LGBTQ in that community, like gay, whatever they decided, it would be one of those things where they would have, I don't know, I think it would be a lot harder because it's on such a grand scale as well. There's so many different opinions based upon it, which shouldn't exist at all, but unfortunately they do. And I think that is probably why. I think it's due to just stereotypes and stuff like that as well. And I mean, it's one of those things that I hopefully will be absolutely normalized at some point in the male game. But at this present moment, I feel like, yeah, it's more, women are more understanding of it than men, and that's rubbish. But it should be something that hopefully will evolve over time.
And looking forward to the future a bit more, what do you think the future is in terms of LGBTQ plus inclusivity in football? Do you think we'll get to a point where we'll see some male players coming out in the future and being open about their sexuality and not experiencing this abuse that everyone's saying that they will get?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think it should be like that anyway. I think I can understand why it might be harder, but I think in years to come, that is definitely something that hopefully will be happening. It just goes to show over time though how much things have changed in general, and it's one of those things that I think it will take time, and it will take, especially in the male game, for people to just be like, do you know what, it really doesn't matter. But I've got so many male friends now that are like heavily into football, they love it, and they've got like gay mates and they're absolutely fine with them, like they've got absolutely no problem at all. They're normally the biggest hype man, like they're the people that want to be there and like just say, do you know what, it really doesn't matter. And I think that is becoming more of a thing now. I think males are just accepting it, and that is exactly what needs to be happening, 100%.
Yeah, and obviously we look at the men's game, like we said. What, from the women's sort of perspective, the women's game's perspective, what do you think the men's game can learn from the women's game? Like, what's the biggest lesson that they can learn and hopefully adopt in the future for equality?
I just think maybe just in terms of just accepting that, like, if you look at the women's game, nobody cares. Like, everybody's just like, do you know what, be who you want to be, and everybody will accept that. And it is just about taking those fundamental things and just being like, do you know what, that is exactly what we need to do. Because I find like a lot of I've got rugby friends and stuff like that as well, who are so supportive, and I just think it's about making that on a grander scale. There's so many people that watch football all over the world, and obviously different countries have different rules when it comes to stuff like this, so everybody's always going to have an opinion. But I think they probably can just take the fact that, do you know what, women are not even faced by it whatsoever, so what difference does it make if it's a male? There is none, like, at all. So I think probably that is probably the biggest thing they can take from it.
Yeah, and obviously looking at another aspect in terms of the media, what do you think, how can they adapt and learn to make a safer environment for more players to come out? Because you've seen like different stories about they're looking for this player to come out. It feels like a bit of a witch hunt.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that's what it is. I think people will always try and judge, and the media are awful for it, because they'll have an idea and then they'll be like, that's definitely what's happened, and they'll twist it and everything like that. And I think there's so much pressure if you're in that situation for you're either gay, you're either straight, you're either bi, you're in one of these categories. And I don't actually think any of those categories really matter at all. So it is one of those things. I think the media just kind of look for what they want, and I think the pressure of that could be horrendous, because some people will sell stories that are horrible about others, and that's just kind of how it works. And it is rubbish, because it is a witch hunt. It definitely is. Like, that's just how it is, and that's how it shouldn't be. They should be taking it on like a positive front, and they should be like, instead of going, oh, is this person LGBT, or they should just be like, oh, this person's LGBT, let's celebrate it. Let's not be nasty about it or like make a massive thing about it, because there's no need to.
Do you think a way that this witch hunt could stop is maybe the next generation of LGBTQ plus sports journalists, or journalists like myself, coming through, more LGBT people sort of in the journalism industry, for it to sort of change? Because we understand.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think that's exactly what needs to happen, and just people need to be more sensitive. Like, I understand people are going to get things wrong. People are going to say the wrong thing, and they might not mean what they say, or it might be interpreted differently. But it's just about being really understanding about what it is you're asking, and just being a bit empathetic about it. Like, don't just say, this is the question, answer it. Like, actually really understand, like, listen to understand, don't listen to reply, because it's just rubbish.
Definitely. Yeah. And obviously looking at statistics by Stonewall, there are a lot of damning statistics in terms of suggesting that a lot of LGBTQ plus people don't like participating in sport because of the fear of discrimination and harassment.
Yeah.
How do you think we can encourage future generations to play the beautiful game, football?
I think it's a really tricky one. I think what you've got to look at in that situation is trying to make sure everybody feels included, and instead of isolated. Or I think when you go through your teenage years anyway, it's a big transition. So when you're like getting into sport and you're participating in different activities outside of school, PE and stuff like that, it's a massive transition anyway. And then if, for example, you are struggling to come out, and then you look at, say, like the men's game, and say you're a male, that would be difficult. I think that is hard. I think it is for women too, 100%, but maybe not so much. So it's one of those things where I think you just need to understand this is what it is, and move on from that, and just see if those kids can be absolutely included in everything. It's such a tough one though, because as soon as a child or a teenager has it in their head that they're being discriminated against or that they don't feel included, that's it. They're just turning it back against sport. And that's the sad thing, because that's when you see dropout rates and everything like that. And that's not how it should be. You should want to go and do a sport, and you should want to play, and you should feel accepted to play regardless of your sexuality. No, that shouldn't matter at all.
I mean, as an LGBT person myself, I think a lot of it is when I go to a football game and I hear this abuse, it just puts me off. It makes me think this isn't welcome for people like myself. So we need to pull out other issues as well, not just participation, but also how to tackle homophobia. And
I think it's such a big thing. It's such a big thing, and it's so real. A lot of people, like I know, have gone through some horrible situations where there's been lots of homophobia about, and it's really difficult, because I think when you're in that situation, you're like, you can't fathom it. Like, if you're in the LGBT community, you are like, I'm normal, I'm fine, this is me. Like, and for other people, I don't think they see it as that. And I think that I might be a generation thing, I'm not sure, but like in terms of people just need to combat like this massive thing, there's massive homophobia issue. It needs to stop, but it's so hard because it's like everywhere, and there's other people always going to have opinions, but I think it's about not voicing them. If you believe something and you believe in it and it's not very nice, don't say it. Like, just keep it to yourself. At the end of the day, like, you don't need to be shouting it at football games, you don't need to be getting people involved, you don't be saying horrible things. It's just nasty, and it's like, if you've got nothing nice to say, just don't say it at all. It's pretty simple, you know.
And a lot of this sort of homophobic abuse happens on social media, which doesn't help as well. But it's just
everywhere. It's horrendous.
Yeah, it definitely is horrendous. We need to sort it out in the future. I think a lot of it's to do with tougher sort of restrictions on social media. I feel like social media needs to take a tougher stance against racism, homophobia, all types.
100%. Like, it doesn't go on for just like LGBTQ, but like obviously the racism stuff and everything like that this year. I just think it's so important that we get rid of all this horrible situation that people are put in, and just because of the sexuality of their race. It just makes absolutely no sense to me. Everybody is equal, everybody deserves exactly the same thing in life, and I just don't really understand it. So it's about getting over those issues and working towards a better future for everybody, I think.
Definitely. And obviously looking into like your own experiences, you've coached in America, and obviously America is very LGBTQ inclusive in all aspects.
Yes.
Which is just a bit further ahead of the English culture. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think we're behind America in that sense?
I don't know. It's a very tricky one, because I think it just depends so I was based in lots of different states when I went out there. And it just depends in the area that you are in America. I think they are evolved massively when it comes to LGBTQ stuff. But I think some states are still stuck behind in the time. So it is just it's a massive country, isn't it? So it's not like us, we're tiny. I feel like it's just about, I don't know, maybe if they're doing things different over there, that in those big states where, in Atlanta, for example, it was really accepted completely, and they had like massive prides and stuff like that when I was there, and it was absolutely amazing to see. But I think maybe because they celebrate pride so much. Like I went to so many games and they had LGBT like flags at the games, like everywhere you went, and you're like, whoa, like this just wouldn't happen back in the UK. Like literally they are so over the top with it, which I think is amazing. And I think it's just about making sure that people feel they can be themselves. But I think with America, it's very like hit and miss. Like some places are completely accepting and will just be absolutely fine, and there are other places that still need to evolve a little bit. I think in terms of a country, we are quite evolved with it, if you compare it to other countries. But at the same time, there's still definitely room for improvement, 100%. Like there's still things that we need to try and work out, and we need to celebrate more of the good than what people think is the bad. Like it's just about understanding people and just accepting them for who they are. But again, that's going to be a time thing. It's going to be one of those things that you can't solve overnight. But things like this rainbow campaign and stuff like pride and things like that, that's what's going to make everybody feel a bit more accepted, a bit more heard. So and hopefully combat like all of the homophobia and stuff like that.
Hopefully we can catch up in the future with America. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
But just to end on a nice note, how much are you looking forward to getting back out there playing football?
Oh, so much. Yeah, honestly, like it's so weird. Like you play football for so long and then it gets taken from you. And I think this year has been crazy for that, because I played football my whole life and I've never stopped. And it's like when obviously lockdown hit the first time, that was okay, football's ended, so we're going to have to just get over it and get through it. And then obviously this happened and I was just getting back into the swing of football. I was enjoying it again. I was really getting my confidence back, and then it gets taken away again. So it's one of those things where I will be so excited to be back and be in a routine and try and balance work life and football life, as hard as that is. Like I'm excited to do that because I know like football has always been my life, and I'm excited to just be back. It'll be really good.
Yeah, it's gonna be nice when it's back. But thank you so much for joining me, Sophie. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome anytime.